Logan's very nice. He bought me this terrific gift just completely out of the blue.
Is that so?
Totally unexpected. It's called a Birkin bag.
A Birkin bag. Oh my God. A Birkin bag.
When it comes to bags, there are two types of women. The ones who have no idea what a Birkin is, and the ones who know it's the holy grail of fashion. But whether you're like Rory, just discovering it, or like her grandma, already obsessed, one thing's for sure. You haven't met the scandal magnet, heartbreak mess, effortlessly iconic British girl behind it all. The one who didn't care about bags, didn't care about brands, yet somehow ended up setting beauty standards that are still trending today? From pioneering the Birkin bag, to creating the iconic Birkin bangs, to inventing skinimalism decades before TikTok, Jane Birkin didn't just change the game. She became the undisputed queen of effortless chic. A white tee, messy bangs, a straw basket swinging at her side, and somehow she made it look like the most glamorous thing in the world. But her story isn't all sunshine and mini dresses. Behind the playful smile and tousled hair was a girl carrying invisible bruises on her basket. A girl who was adored by the world but left abandoned by love. A girl who was idolized in France and banned in her home country, England. So who exactly was this basket-carrying, free-spirited 60s icon who once jumped into the Seine River in the middle of the night for forgiveness? And how did she become a fashion legend while battling so much chaos? Stick around, because the name you're about to hear carried a lot more than just a handbag legacy. It carried rebellion, heartbreak, and a spirit that defined a generation. And if you think you know Jane Birkin, trust me, you're just scratching the surface. The real story is way messier, and way more beautiful. So to really get how Jane Birkin became Jane Birkin, we have to rewind, all the way back to December 14th, 1946, when Jane Mallory Birkin was born right in the heart of Marylebone, London. Raised in Chelsea, surrounded by wealthy relatives and wartime heroes, Jane grew up in a family that already knew the spotlight. Her father, David Birkin, a decorated World War II spy who worked with the French resistance. Her mother, Judy Campbell, a major theater actress and muse to Noel Coward. Jane had the kind of background people love to romanticize. Nepo baby status? Oh, fully secured. But here's the thing. Having it all doesn't guarantee you feel like you belong. Growing up, Jane didn't feel dazzling. She didn't even feel pretty. Standing next to her mother's effortless glamour, Jane thought she looked awkward, unfinished, and forgettable. She once said that even as a little girl, she believed her brother was the better-looking one. And school? It was brutal. Jane was bullied at boarding school for being flat-chested. Kids called her half boy, half girl. She later said, "I had no chest, not even a developing bosom. It was horrible." Still, maybe because performing was practically the family business, Jane decided to try her luck too. She was 17 when she went up for her very first audition, a play called Carving a Statue by Graham Greene. And honestly, it was a disaster. She forgot every line, froze up completely, total wipeout. But somehow, that chaotic, fumbling energy worked in her favor. Instead of tossing her out, the casting directors decided to roll with it. They said, "Oh, that doesn't matter. You're going to play a deaf and dumb girl. No lines, just presence." Jane later laughed about it. "I got my first part by making a fool of myself. Pure luck." But it planted the idea that maybe, just maybe, she had something the camera could love. Not long after, she took another job, the musical Passion Flower Hotel. And that's where everything changed. Because backstage, she met John Barry, composer of the James Bond theme. 30 years old, confident, charming, and already a star in his own right. She was just 17. He was 30. They fell into a relationship almost instantly. Barry proposed, but Jane's father refused to give his blessing. She was still legally a minor, and he wasn't thrilled about his teenage daughter marrying a much older man. But by the time Jane turned 18, they went ahead with it anyway, married against her father's wishes. And just a year later, Jane was a young wife and mother, holding baby Kate in her arms. She once said she couldn't believe that someone as accomplished as John Barry would choose her of all people. She was so scared of being seen as ugly that she slept with an eye pencil under her pillow, ready to touch up her eyes if he ever woke up during the night. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a 19-year-old girl terrified of not being enough, and the cracks were already starting to show. Around that same time, Jane landed a small part in Blow Up, the film that would end up changing her life. The movie gained instant notoriety. And not because of the art house cinematography. It was Jane's nude scene that caused all the headlines. But here's the real tea. Jane didn't strip down out of rebellion. She did it because John Barry bet she wouldn't have the guts. So Jane, desperate to prove him wrong, swallowed her fear and did it. It made her famous. But it didn't save the marriage. One night, John came stumbling into the bathroom, dead drunk. Jane asked, "Where were you?" And without even flinching, he said, "I went out with a woman." At first, she thought he was joking. but he repeated it. "You don't want me to lie to you, do you?" he said. Jane was so stunned she could barely hold it together. She started crying. He told her to stop, to go to bed, like she was a child annoying him. Shaking and heartbroken, she got out of bed and walked straight into the doorframe. Now she had a black eye and a howl in her chest she couldn't even name. She stormed down the hallway, furious, cracking eggs into the sink, scraping her legs raw with the broken shells until blood ran down her skin. She raided the minibar, drinking cherry liqueur and port, trying, desperately, to drown out the pain. And then, just as she was spiraling, John barged back in and shouted at her to come to bed. Later, Jane said, "I can't explain the madness of that night, except that I felt so terribly sad and miserable. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was Jane hitting rock bottom, quietly, painfully, and completely alone. And just when you think it couldn't get colder." John Barry soon left for America, chasing fame, chasing freedom, and left Jane behind in London with their daughter, abandoned. So there Jane was, 21 years old, broke, divorced, single mom, and back living with her parents. Not exactly the dream life she imagined when she married a James Bond composer at 18. It should have been the end of the story, but for Jane Birkin, endings were just the start of something wilder. So when the opportunity came to audition for a French film called Slogan, she didn't hesitate, even though she barely spoke a word of French, even though the script made almost no sense to her. She threw on a little dress, showed up, and tried her best to fake it. Classic Birkin move. And that's when she met him. Serge Gainsbourg, the man she would accidentally call beef stew, the man she would dance with in broken French and clumsy steps, the man she would one night throw herself into the freezing Seine for. Already infamous in France, a provocative songwriter, poet, and singer, and very well known for his bad boy reputation. He was charming, Cher, but he was also famous for being harsh, difficult, and carrying around this constant cloud of arrogance like a second cigarette smoke trail. And to make things even spicier, Serge had just come off a very public, very messy affair with Brigitte Bardot. Yeah, that Brigitte Bardot. They had recorded a steamy, controversial song together, but when Bardot's husband found out, she freaked out and revoked her consent to release it. So imagine Serge's mood when he met Jane. The man was a walking heartbreak hangover. And Jane? She didn't exactly help her case. She barely spoke French. She was nervous. And, in the most Jane Birkin move ever, she accidentally called him bourguignon, which, for anyone keeping track, is beef stew. Imagine walking into an audition and calling your future co-star beef stew to his face. Safe to say the first impression wasn't great. Even after she officially got the role, Jane could feel Serge didn't like her. She thought he didn't want her there, didn't want her in the film, didn't want to deal with this awkward English girl at all. So Jane, in a flash of wild intuition, went to the director and suggested they go out to dinner to maybe break the ice. The director agreed, and then, brilliantly, stood them up on purpose. Left Jane and Serge alone together, with no script, no cameras, no backup. At first it was a disaster. Serge was cold, Jane was clumsy. They barely understood each other, but somewhere between the cheap wine, the broken French, and the awkward silences, something shifted. Jane, desperate to break the weirdness, did something insane. She dragged Serge onto the dance floor. This shy, awkward English girl pulled the grumpy French poet into the middle of the restaurant and made him dance. And somehow, right there, stumbling through clumsy steps and laughing so hard they could barely stand up straight, everything changed. The coldness melted. The sadness cracked. And for the first time in a long time, Serge let someone in. They didn't just finish Slogan together, they became inseparable. Lovers on screen and off. And their chemistry didn't stop when the cameras cut. They even performed the film's theme song together, La Chanson de Slogan, marking the first of many collaborations between them. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was real. It was messy and passionate and full of that strange electric thing neither of them could fake. After Slogan wrapped, Jane made a decision that shocked everyone. She moved to France permanently, and she almost didn't. She was due to go back to England, feeling unsure, lost again, until a new opportunity popped up. A small role in La Piscine, a steamy thriller starring Romy Schneider and Alain Delon. It wasn't a huge part, but it was enough to keep her in Paris, enough to keep her next to Serge. And just as her career started quietly expanding, Serge dropped a bombshell. He brought up Je t'aime, Moi non plus again, the scandalous, whispering duet he'd written for Brigitte Bardot. Jane agreed to record it, partly because she was still a little jealous of Bardot, partly because she wanted Serge to see her as his muse now, no one else's. Shortly after they finished recording, Serge took Jane to dinner at the Hôtel des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Just casual dinner. And Serge, without saying a word, slipped the record onto the restaurant's player. Within seconds, the entire atmosphere froze. Couples who had been chatting and laughing suddenly stopped. like someone had pressed pause on Paris itself. Everyone just sat there, listening in stunned, slightly horrified silence to Jane's breathy moans and Serge's whispered declarations. Serge leaned over, totally unfazed, and said, "I think we've got a hit record." And oh, they did. A scandalous, world-shaking, history-making hit. The song exploded, and so did the outrage. It was banned by radio stations across Italy, Spain, and the UK. In Italy, the head of their record label literally got jailed for offending public morality. Not fined, jailed. But the bans didn't stop it. If anything, they fueled the fire. Je t'aime made UK chart history on October 4th, 1969, and again the following week, by doing something no record had ever done before. It charted twice at the same time, same song, same artists, same recording. The only difference? 2 different record labels fighting over it. Originally, it was released on Fontana Records, but the second the controversy blew up, Fontana panicked and pulled the single from shops. Then Major Minor Records, seeing a gold mine, grabbed it and re-released it immediately. So for a while, both versions were in stores. And on October 4th, the Fontana version sat at number 16, while the Major Minor release was already climbing at number 3. A week later, they were both still charting. At that time, Je t'aime, Moi non plus became the biggest selling completely foreign language single the UK had ever seen. Scandal couldn't kill it. It made it immortal. And in the middle of it all was Jane, the shy English girl who once thought she wasn't pretty enough to even be noticed. Now she was the voice of the most forbidden, talked about song on the planet. Serge didn't just love Jane, he made her his muse. He wrote songs for her, put her on the cover of his albums, directed films around her, crafted entire worlds where she was always the center, always the light. He made her see herself the way he saw her, something no one, not even her first husband, had ever done. Early on, Serge took Jane to the Louvre Museum, not just to impress her, but to show her something deeper. They wandered through galleries of medieval paintings, and Serge pointed out the women in them, the delicate faces, the long limbs, the raw, vulnerable beauty. He said that he'd always drawn girls like me when he'd been at art school, Jane remembered. He made her realize she wasn't weird. She wasn't ugly. She wasn't too skinny or too plain. She was art. She was exactly the kind of beauty he had worshipped his whole life. And slowly, Jane started to believe it too. The heavy eyeliner, the armor of makeup she'd clung to during her first marriage, it started to vanish. She began rocking what we'd now call skinimalism decades before TikTok even knew it existed. Bare skin, messy bangs, natural lips, no heavy contour, no thick eyeliner walls to hide behind. For the first time, Jane looked in the mirror and saw someone she actually liked. And that's how you know you found a real man. Not someone who tears you down and calls it love, but someone who makes you love yourself harder. Jane and Serge were everywhere. They became part of the Paris landscape, like the Seine or the Eiffel Tower. We quickly became part of the furniture in France, Jane said, along with my daughter Kate, and then Charlotte, who was born soon after.
Ça fait un couple marrant qui suis d'origine russe. Seule mon éducation est française. Alors, la Russie et l'Angleterre, ça fait un cocktail. Une espèce de Bloody Mary. Très fort en vodka.
Mais ça me va très bien que tout le monde pense qu'il est affreux et tout ça. Quand j'étais petite, j'avais un perroquet qui manque tout le monde, sauf moi. Il m'adorait parce que j'ai osé lui chatouiller dessus les ailes. Alors il m'adorait. Tout le monde dit, comment tu peux aimer cet affreux perroquet? J'ai pensé, tiens, elle est très gentille, mais je veux pas que les autres savent. C'était un secret.
Only Jane could love him like that, and only Serge would ever let her. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was real. And soon, the whole world was watching. Saturday nights, you could find Jane lying across a piano on French television, draped in sequined Yves Saint Laurent dresses, singing Serge's smoky ballads. Other nights, you'd spot them at Maxime's nightclub. Serge in a sharp suit, Jane swinging her giant straw basket like it was Chanel, and the bouncer still waving them right in without a blink. That basket wasn't just an accessory. It was part of her, the final, perfect contradiction. While everyone else was dripping in diamonds and designer bags, Jane carried a battered straw basket, and somehow made it look cooler than couture. She paired it with everything. Tiny white dresses, slouchy jeans, even winter coats. There are photos of her trudging through Paris in boots and thick sweaters, basket still swinging from her arm like it had a life of its own. She didn't treat it like a trend. She lived with it. That was Jane's real magic. She didn't wear things because they were expensive. She wore them because they felt like home. And when you look at old photos of her, you can tell. Everything she wore carried a little bit of her with it. Jane's style became a legend. Short, floaty dresses. Taffeta gowns straight from Yves Saint Laurent's boutique, where Serge would help pick out outfits, fussing over layers of fabric like a proud stylist. She loved the excitement of getting ready, slipping into tiered dresses, throwing on flats or boots, brushing her hair once, maybe twice, and heading out into the Parisian night until 5 a.m. If they weren't on a TV set, or making a movie, or recording some scandalous new song, they were out. Clubbing, laughing, living. They were crowned the couple of the year without even trying. Everyone assumed they were married. From the outside, it looked obvious. The love, the chaos, the life they built. But the truth was messier. Jane never married Serge. She didn't see the point, and she definitely didn't like people assuming otherwise. Once during an interview, a journalist casually referred to Serge as her husband. Jane cut him off. "He's not my husband." But in Serge's defense, he joked that she refused to give him her fingerprints. So yeah, they weren't husband and wife, but they were tangled together in a way that made people believe in love, or at least the wild, glamorous version of it. Designers begged her to wear their dresses. Photographers lined up to shoot them. And for the first time, Jane realized, maybe, just maybe, some people thought she was their cup of tea. "I never imagined that I was particularly beautiful," she said, even then, but I knew I was what Serge thought was beautiful. It took her until almost 28 to really feel like herself. It happened when Serge directed her in the film Faut je t'aime, moi non plus. He made her strip off all her makeup, cut her hair short, no eyeliner, no lipstick, just Jane, raw and real. "It was only then that I felt truly secure in my own skin," she said. "I felt great with no effort at all. But, and this is the part no fairy tale ever tells you, it wasn't all sunshine and sequins. Jane and Serge loved hard, and they fought hard too. One night, out at a nightclub, things exploded in a way only they could manage. Serge, trying to be funny and very drunk, grabbed Jane's beloved handbag and flipped it upside down in front of everyone. Her personal things scattered across the dance floor. Private little pieces of her, spilled out for everyone to see. Jane was humiliated. She vowed revenge. And then, like a scene out of a cartoon, someone handed her a custard pie. Egged on by her equally drunk friends, Jane didn't even think. She smashed it straight into Serge's face. Perfect aim, direct hit. Serge stood up, crusts of pie falling off his eyebrows, wiped his mouth with quiet dignity, and walked straight out of the club. Jane panicked. She realized she hadn't just embarrassed him. She had shamed him in public, and that was a line you didn't cross with Serge Gainsbourg. She chased after him, sprinting past him, heart pounding, trying to figure out how to make him forgive her. When she reached the Seine, she did the most reckless thing imaginable. She crouched behind a tree, waited until he followed, and then threw herself into the freezing river, fully clothed. No plan, no hesitation. Serge, always one for dramatic gestures, tore off his Cartier watch to save it from the water. Priorities, always, and rushed down after her. The Paris fire brigade had to pull her out, but somehow when she landed in Serge's arms, wet, shivering, mascara running, he forgave her. It was very childish, Jane said later, but he was very sweet. That was them. Childish, passionate, beautifully broken, perfect in their chaos. But no matter how intense the love was, even Jane had her breaking point. Serge's drinking, which had once seemed funny and rebellious, had turned heavy, sad, monotonous. He drank a vast amount, Jane later said. It started out being funny, and then it got monotonous. It wore her down. It wore them down. And in 1980, after more than a decade of messy love, fights, forgiveness, and wild nights, she left him. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she had to love herself more. And yet, even after the breakup, they never really let each other go. They stayed friends, best friends, connected in a way few people could ever understand. Serge kept writing music for her, almost like he couldn't help himself. His muse, even when she wasn't in his bed. They renewed their creative partnership with Baby Alone in Babylon in 1983, their first album together since splitting. And if their love songs were passionate before, now they were haunting. This was the album of heartbreak, the album of regret. Jane said, "All of a sudden, Serge got me to sing of his wounds and his feminine side. It was very unsettling to sing about the wounds that you have triggered." She sang differently now too. Gone was the little girl voice that once teased and excited. Jane sang higher, richer, full of pain. They kept recording together. Lost Song in 1987 and Amour de Fente in 1990. The last album Serge wrote for her before his death from a heart attack in March 1991. Jane later said, "Our friendship went on until his dying day." But even as Serge stayed stitched into her heart, Jane found new life elsewhere too. On the set of La Fille Prodigue, she met French filmmaker Jacques Doyon, a different kind of man, softer, quieter, far less chaotic. They fell in love, and in 1982, Jane gave birth to her third daughter, Lou Doyon. Jane kept working too, carving out a career on her own terms. She starred in La Pirate and in Jacques Rivette's L'amour par terre, earning a César Award nomination for her performance. Slowly, she was building a life that was hers, not Serge's, not anyone else's. Life with Jacques Doyon was different, quieter, more grounded. But it also meant leaving pieces of her old life behind, sometimes quite literally. Even her signature basket, the beloved battered straw bag she had carried everywhere through the Serge years, didn't survive. Jacques hated gimmicks. One day, as Jane was leaving for England, he reversed his car right over it, smashed it to bits. It was his way of making a point. That chapter was over. And funny enough, it was that missing basket that accidentally led Jane to one of the most iconic fashion moments in history. On that very flight to London, freshly without her trusty basket and juggling papers, Jane found herself upgraded to first class. She sat down next to a polite Frenchman, a stranger, with her agenda stuffed full of receipts and bits of paper. Jane later recalled,
I was going to London and they upgraded me, the hostess upgraded me, and I found myself next door to a very polite gentleman.
As usual, her papers exploded onto the floor mid-flight. She scrambled to pick them up. The man leaned over and said,
He said you should have pockets in that agenda. And I said, what can you do? Hermès don't make it with pockets. And he said, I am Hermès. I said, oh.
That man was Jean-Louis Dumas, the CEO of Hermès. Casually, the way only Jane could, she tossed out an idea.
I said, why don't you make a handbag that's a bit bigger than the Kelly and not as big as my suitcase, which weighs a ton?
Dumas asked, like what? Jane, laughing later, said she grabbed the closest thing she could find, the airplane's vomit bag, and sketched out a rough design.
There was the sort of vomit bag. And so I did a little sketch. He took it with him.
About a month later, Hermès called her up and asked if she could swing by. They had something to show her. When Jane arrived, they showed her a prototype made out of cardboard.
This bag, and it was made out of cardboard. It looked lovely, actually, in cardboard.
She suggested leather, a few tweaks, softer, lighter, more real. And then came the moment that would tie her name to history forever. They said,
well, we've got the Kelly, and we've got Monsieur Dumas' traveling bag or something. Can we call this, your name? Oh, I said, with pleasure. I was so flattered.
And just like that, she gifted us the most iconic handbag. But here's the thing about Jane Birkin and the Birkin bag. She never treated it like a trophy, never flaunted it like a status symbol. Jane was, well, Jane. Even when the fashion world lost its mind over her name, she only ever had one Birkin bag at a time, and it wasn't kept in a glass box or carefully stored in temperature-controlled closets like celebrities do now. Nope. Jane's bag was real. Used, lived in, covered in stickers, scratched, worn at the handles. She scrawled her daughter's names inside it. She stuck political protest stickers on the outside. It was bashed around airports, shoved under chairs at cafes, dragged to protests. It was never precious. It was hers.
Because when you walk around, they jingle and jangle. So it's a happy sound.
And if you needed more proof that Jane Birkin was built different, she actually asked Hermès to drop her name from the crocodile skin versions of the Birkin bag. When she learned about the cruelty involved in exotic leather production, Jane didn't just stay quiet for the sake of branding. She publicly asked Hermès to remove her name from any bags made with crocodile skins. Hermès responded by changing their practices and by keeping the conversation open with her. Because for Jane, fashion was never the goal. Humanity was. Over the years, she auctioned off her personal Birkin bags to raise money for causes she cared about. AIDS research, human rights, disaster relief, women's health initiatives. She even arranged with Hermès to donate a portion of Birkin bag sales directly to charity. Quietly, no big press tours, no influencer campaigns. And even after her death, the impact of that arrangement lives on. Jane didn't see the Birkin as a prize. She saw it as a tool, one more thing she could turn into something meaningful, something good. It was never about the bag. It was always about the life lived around it. And it wasn't just fashion or charity auctions. Jane Birkin lived her activism out loud, without scripts, without PR teams filtering her words. When she believed in something, she showed up. When she was angry about injustice, she spoke up. Unlike so many celebrities today, who tiptoe around causes, afraid to ruffle feathers or lose sponsors, Jane was fearless. She protested for Amnesty International. She marched for immigrant rights. She fought for women's health access and AIDS research long before it was trendy or safe. She used her fame, what little she cared about it, like a battering ram for good. No manager telling her to stay neutral, no fear of losing contracts, just heart, just guts, just Jane. Because for her, fame was never the point. Human decency was. Jane Birkin passed away on July 16th, 2023, in Paris. She was 76. And the second the news hit, people showed up. Outside the Saint Roch Church, a giant screen played her funeral. French hymns, English hymns, just the way she would have wanted. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, some with flowers, some in tears, all united by a quiet kind of reverence. She wasn't just being mourned, she was being celebrated for her spirit, her spontaneity, her rare ability to make imperfection feel like art. She loved France, and France loved her right back. Even in death, Jane Birkin made people feel something. And yet, for so many people, the name Birkin will always first trigger an image of the handbag, the luxury, the status, the $50,000 flex. But if that's all they remember, they miss the point completely. Jane Birkin wasn't a brand. She wasn't an accessory. She wasn't an idea manufactured in some Parisian boardroom. She was real, awkward, brave, beautiful, messy in the best possible way. She was a woman who turned heartbreak into music, vulnerability into power, imperfection into style, and accidents into legends. She didn't invent effortless chic. She was effortless chic because she didn't fake it. She just lived it. Jane Birkin left us more than a handbag. She left us a blueprint for living. Love harder, laugh louder, care braver. Never apologize for being exactly who you are. And honestly, we could all use a little more of that.